If you're anything like me, you probably think about the nature versus nurture debate at least once a day. It's a very rich topic that I feel like no matter how much we examine, there's not really one specific correct answer. Have you ever wondered why people do what they do? I mean, strip away the excuses, the stories, the headlines. What really drives someone to commit the unthinkable? Is it nature, which is something hardwired, coded into their DNA like a shadow they were born with? Or is it nurture? The environment, the betrayals, the loneliness, the shame, the circumstances that slowly mold an ordinary person into someone capable of violence. In some societies, we don't like this question. We prefer easy answers like, he was evil or she was weak. But psychology refuses to let us off that easy, because the truth is, nature and nurture are constantly dancing inside us. Sometimes, nurture pushes a person to the edge, and sometimes nature whispers that the edge was always there where they belonged. Tonight, we're not just telling a crime story. We're dissecting the human mind. 2 cases, 2 killers, one driven by raw emotion and the other by cold obsession. One born out of nurture and the other out of nature. By the end of this episode, I promise you'll be asking yourself a question you may not want the answer to. Are monsters created, or were they always there? Hello and welcome, or after 10 episodes, I guess I can say welcome back to a new episode of Peace by Pearl, where the mind is not a maze to escape, but a map to unravel. You know how sometimes a story blows up online and people go back to wondering if some people are just born evil, or if anyone put under the right amount of pressure and have the right buttons pushed could snap and do the unthinkable. It's the classic nature versus nurture debate. Well, that's exactly what we're about to examine today with 2 stories that are similar in nature but different in motive. A crime that took place in Saudi Arabia, where I come from, last year suddenly started trending in Yemen. Everyone was talking about it, flipping the world upside down over this one case. But to really understand why, it's not enough to start with today. We need to rewind, go back to a couple of years ago. Back to 2022. Back to a woman named Manal. She was Yemeni, living in the city of Taiz. She had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. Her husband, Idris, was one of those thousands of men working in Saudi Arabia. His job was in Jeddah, and like many others, he came back every 6 or 7 months to see his family. So Manal was left alone most of the time, just her children, and the loneliness. And loneliness has a way of creating doors where there should be walls. In some Arab societies, women left behind by migrating husbands often live under intense pressure. Loneliness is treated as weakness. Asking for help feels like shame, and talking about emotional needs could be considered a taboo. This silence is dangerous. It can push people to seek comfort in all of the wrong places. Manal's days were lonely. Most of the time, it was just her and her children alone at home. And when she needed to visit her village to see her family, because yes, she came from a village, she would take what's called a keddat, which is basically a private driver who uses his car like a taxi for long trips. It was cheaper than the official taxis, and she'd rely on the same driver again and again. His name was Yasser. At first, it was simple. He drove her to her village, dropped her off, brought her back. But the more rides she took with him, the more Yasser started to notice things. Things that were probably better unnoticed. That she was alone, that her husband was away most of the time, that she was vulnerable, and he slowly began to get closer to her. And that's where everything began to unravel. At first, it was harmless, or at least that's what Manal told herself. Yasser was just the driver. but loneliness can play tricks on people. And Yasser knew exactly how to exploit it. Ride after ride, he started to soften his tone with her. Compliments slipped into conversations. He played on her emotions. Your husband is away. You must feel so alone. You deserve attention. A woman like you deserves to have someone by her side. And little by little, Manal gave in. What started as small talk in the car grew into something darker, a secret, an affair. Here's the thing. In small village communities where divorce is stigmatized, where a woman's worth is tied to her honor, and where mental health support is almost non-existent, emotional vulnerability often gets twisted into dangerous decisions. Instead of a safe space to talk about loneliness, shame silences people until they collapse under it. And here we see another layer of mental health that we don't talk about in some Arab homes: emotional neglect. Idris was away providing financially, but emotionally, he was absent. And in some cultures, women are taught to swallow that absence. No therapy, no, it's okay to feel abandoned, no, nothing. Instead, there's only silence. And silence doesn't erase the need. It only buries it until someone else digs it up. For months, it went in silence. Idris, meanwhile, was working in Saudi Arabia completely unaware of what's happening. Calling home, checking in, providing for his family, thinking everything was fine. But secrets have a way of leaking out. Idris began to notice something was off. When he visited Yemen, Manal was distant, distracted, always holding her phone a little too tightly, whispering into it, stepping away from him. He listened to his gut. He paid attention, and eventually he found the truth. His wife was betraying him. His reaction was exactly what you'd expect. He exploded, kicked her out of the house. He felt humiliated, furious, and broken. Manal scrambled. She swore nothing serious had happened. She begged, she cried, she promised it was just a mistake, that Yasser meant nothing, and that nothing even happened. And here's the thing. Idris was torn between rage and love, between his pride and his children. He eventually forgave her because he believed that nothing happened. He decided to let it go. Maybe it was easier to believe that nothing really had happened, even though deep down he felt something more was going on. I don't know. Notice how central shame is here. In many Arab societies, betrayal isn't just between two people. It's between two families, two tribes, mainly because of how deeply connected we are to our roots and community. In this case, forgiveness wasn't really about moving on. It was about saving face. And when forgiveness is motivated by shame, not healing, it leaves a wound wide open. A wound that festers until it turns toxic. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. And this mistake, well, it wasn't going away anytime soon. Or maybe ever. After the chaos, Idris tried to glue the family back together. He told Manal to prepare her documents for travel as he was taking her and the kids to Saudi Arabia with him. He was planning on doing that before the affair, but obviously the affair probably made him want to do it even more. A fresh start in Medina, a new home, a new city, and a new life. Medina is a city in the west of Saudi Arabia, by the way. For Manal, it was a chance to bury the past, to convince herself Yasser was just a mistake. She could lock him away forever and pretend it never happened. But Yasser, on the other hand, wasn't letting go. He kept reaching out through Facebook, through messages, through whatever scraps of communication he could find. I want to see you. I need you. Can we just talk? Manal's response was always the same. Leave me alone. It's over. You're going to ruin me. But obsession doesn't respect boundaries now, does it? Yasser couldn't accept rejection. He let the bitterness consume him. And in late 2024, his revenge went public. One night, he published everything online: screenshots of messages, photos of Manal, proof of their relationship. Not only that, he added her full name, her family's name, where she lived, even details about her new life in Saudi Arabia. It was digital execution. And this is where mental health collides with modern life. Social media isn't just a platform, it's a court, a judge, and an executioner. In our societies, sometimes what will people say weighs heavier than how do I feel? So a Facebook post can destroy a life faster than any bullet. The psychological torture of public exposure can drive people past the point of reason in any culture or country, but specifically one that honors reputation above anything else. And when the post went viral, the fallout was immediate. Everyone saw it. Her family, her tribe, Idris's relatives, everyone. The shame wasn't private anymore. It was viral. Idris, who had once forgiven her, snapped. This time, he didn't want to hear excuses. He didn't want to hear lies. He said, "You lied to my face. You swore to me. You swore to God. And now the whole world can see the truth." He kicked her out again. Manal begged, but this time, Idris's patience ran out. The marriage was finished. At least, that's what he thought. Because what came next was worse than anything he could have imagined. When Idris shut the door on her, Manal didn't disappear. She went to stay with her mother, who was also living in Saudi Arabia. But she couldn't let go of Idris and the house they shared. She still had a key, and she still had rage boiling inside of her. Emphasis on boiling. Idris, exhausted from work, had no idea what was coming. He settled into a routine: back from his job, collapse into bed, wake up at dawn, and do it all over again. Predictable, normal, vulnerable. One night, while he was sleeping, Manal slipped in. In her hands wasn't reconciliation. It was a container filled with cooking oil. Heated, bubbling, deadly. She stood over her husband as he slept and poured the boiling oil all across his body. The sound wasn't just sizzling skin. It was his screams tearing through the walls. Neighbors rushed to their doors as Idris thrashed, the oil burning his face, his chest, his arms. His skin was peeling, his flesh was melting, the kind of pain you just drown in. They dragged him to the hospital, but the doctors were stunned. "This looks like someone dropped him in a vat of boiling oil," they said. His nose was gone, his skin hanging, his body was barely recognizable. For a week, Idris fought for his life. Surgery after surgery, graft after graft, but the pain was relentless. After 7 days, his body gave out. He died in agony. Manal's crime shows us that psychology of desperation. Her violence wasn't about greed or power. It was about humiliation, rejection, rage. And because mental health support is absent, her coping mechanism became destruction. This is the dark side of emotional neglect in our region. When silence and shame are the only languages we know, anger becomes the only outlet left. Manal was arrested immediately. She confessed. There was absolutely no denying it. But while she sat in custody, the internet wasn't really done. People were demanding, what about Yasser? Because in their eyes, Manal may have carried out the murder, but Yasser was the one who lit the fire. When news of Idris's death broke, people weren't just angry at Manal. They wanted Yasser's head too. Because, let's be real, if he hadn't chased her, if he hadn't plastered their messages all over the internet, they believe Idris would maybe still be alive. Manal might be guilty of murder, but Yasser wasn't innocent. He was the spark. Social media in Yemen erupted. Posts everywhere were, Why should she face execution while he walks free? He destroyed a family, then deleted his account like nothing happened. And that's exactly what Yasser did. He wiped his Facebook clean, erased the pictures, pretended nothing ever existed. And when police questioned him, he denied everything. No, not me. I don't know this woman. This account is of mine. For a moment, it worked. No proof, no account, no evidence. They let him go. But the public wasn't having it. Families, tribes, ordinary people flooded the authorities with pressure. They wanted Yasser back in custody. And this time, investigators dug deeper. They seized his phones, his laptops, every device he's owned. And with cybercrime specialists, they recovered the deleted files, the photos, the messages, the exact IP address. Piece by piece, the truth came back to life. And finally, Yasser cracked. He admitted everything. Today, Manal sits behind bars in Saudi Arabia, likely facing execution. Idris is gone, their 2 children are orphans, and Yasser, the man who started it all, will probably spend a few years behind prison walls, and the damage can't be undone. This is where the circumstances defense of nature versus nurture comes in. Manal's choice didn't come from evil. It came from unmet needs, from emotional neglect. Idris's thought sending money equaled love, but love without presence feels like absence, and absence, when silenced by cultural shame, turns into hunger. Not physical hunger, but emotional hunger. And emotional hunger will accept crumbs, even when those crumbs come from danger. So does she fall under the nurture defense, or would she have committed a crime at any other given moment, thinking that she has an excuse or justification to do so? I don't want people to misunderstand me. I am in no way, shape, or form defending Manal. We've all been through shame. We've all been through negative emotions, and we didn't commit murder. I'm just trying to understand where the motive came from. I also want to highlight that shame here is the hidden character in the story. As I mentioned before, in Arab societies, betrayal isn't just between a husband and a wife. It's a stain on the entire family, the tribe, the reputation. And reputation is very, very important in our culture. Perhaps the most important. Manal's attack wasn't random. It was premeditated, yes, but also emotional. A crime soaked in rage and humiliation. This is how nurture operates. When the right buttons are pushed, loneliness, shame, rejection, it can turn ordinary people into murderers. And in societies where therapy is a taboo, where vulnerability is mocked, emotions don't dissolve, they explode. This is why I try to combine mental health with storytelling. Storytelling for me is a way to make mental health digestible, to slowly be able to talk about these topics that are considered taboo and get rid of the fear of stigmatization. Imagine if shame had been replaced with support, if emotional needs had been met with empathy instead of silence. Would the rest of this case still look the same? Our story doesn't end there, because while Manal's case was staring through headlines, another story from the past resurfaced, this one out of Libya. Libya is an Arabic-speaking country in North Africa. So, let's go back to 2010. 15 years ago. A young man named Ahmed, just 19 years old, lives in the city of Masrata. On the outside, he seemed fine. He was strong, tall, and broad-shouldered. He was the kind of son any parent would be proud of. Very quiet, very kept to himself. He was the only child of his mother and father, who gave him everything he asked for, and then some more. But here's the twist. Ahmed wasn't like other boys his age. While his peers spent their time with friends, at gatherings, or out on the streets, Ahmed preferred silence. He liked isolation. He wasn't social. He avoided family events. Even at school, he kept to himself. And when he wasn't at school, he was glued to the television. This was 2010. long before TikTok, Instagram, and all the constant noise of today. Back then, television was still center stage, and Ahmed wasn't watching comedies or football or soap operas. No, he was addicted to crime shows. Documentaries about serial killers, reenactments of brutal murders, programs about gangs, prison, and organized crime. He devoured it all. And slowly, his reality started to blur. And I'm not talking about here, I know that there is morbid curiosity where a lot of people are interested in true crime. I'm also one of those people because I would really be intrigued in understanding the psyche behind what pushes someone to commit the unthinkable. However, there is a difference between curiosity and then there's a difference between enjoyment of consuming certain media where you know people are getting hurt. Because he wasn't just watching, you see, he was fantasizing. Every episode about a serial killer was like a manual. He memorized the details, how they stalked their victims, how they killed them, how they covered their tracks, and the way the shows presented it. Neutral, almost glorified, made it even worse. Somewhere deep inside, Ahmed decided, I want this. I want to be one of them. Not just another killer. He wanted his name to be remembered. He wanted to be ranked like the monsters he idealized. Number 1 in China, number 2 in Russia, number 5, Libya. That'll be me. That was the fantasies that consumed him. This is where Ahmed's case is chilling. Manal's crime was a case of nurture, triggered by rejection, by shame, by environment. Ahmed's crime? Well, this one points to nature. No trauma, no poverty, no abuse, just an inner wiring that bent toward darkness. Once Ahmed made up his mind, his whole life shifted. He wasn't just daydreaming anymore. He was preparing. He started working out, building stamina. He told himself, a real killer needs strength. He needs endurance. He needs to be able to chase, fight, and escape. In his room, he created what he called his operation base, 4 walls that became a crime lab. He scribbled notes, drew maps, listed supplies, knives, gloves, masks, ropes. On a board, he tracked his routines, his future victims' routines, his own movements, and everything he needs to commit this murder. And yes, he already had a victim in mind. Across from his building lived a woman. She was 27 years old, married with 2 small children. One just 3 years old, the other was an infant. Her husband was often away. She was usually home alone, vulnerable. It was perfect. For 3 weeks, Ahmed studied her like a hunter studying prey. What time did she leave for work? When she dropped her kids at her mother's? When she came back? Which lights stayed on? Which windows were open? Everything he could possibly learn about her. In his head, the crime wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was a schedule. And the deeper he planned, the deeper he slipped into the role he thought he was born to play. Not Ahmed, the quiet boy next door, but Ahmed, the professional killer. Because yes, he had plans of becoming a hitman. By the end of December 2010, he was ready. The tools were prepared. The timing was exact. All he needed was the moment. And that moment came in the morning of December 27th. It was just after dawn on December 27th, 2010. The streets were quiet. The city was still waking up. Ahmed slipped into the building and climbed the stairs, hiding in the shadows of the landing above her apartment. He knew her routine by heart. Any minute now, she'd open the door to take her children to her mother's. And then it happened. The door swung open. She stood with her back turned, calling to her kids inside. Vulnerable, exactly as he pictured it. Ahmed rushed down the stairs. Before she even realized, he shoved her back inside and slammed the door shut. Both of them fell to the floor. By the time she turned her head, the knife was already in his hand. The first stab, then comes the second, the third, over and over until blood sprayed and splattered all across the floor, and her screams filled the air. Her children, who were just 3 years old and 9 months old, watched their mother collapse, screaming and crying in pure terror. But the woman wasn't ready to give up. Even with 7, yes, 7 stab wounds, she fought back. She clawed at his face, yanked at his mask. And in that moment of desperate strength, she saw him. She recognized him. It was her neighbor, Ahmed. That's when the fear in her eyes turned to rage. She screamed his name, but Ahmed panicked. He couldn't let her live. He shoved her against the wall, stabbed her again, then pinned her to the ground, pressing his hands against her throat until her body stopped moving. There was a moment of silence. And then, the unthinkable. Ahmed turned to the children. First the boy, just 3 years old, trembling and crying. Ahmed lifted his chin with one hand, drove the knife across his throat with the other. The boy collapsed instantly. Then the baby girl, 9 months old, innocent. He cradled her on his knee and slit her throat from ear to ear too. Placed her tiny body next to her brother's. The floor was a slaughterhouse. Ahmed stood there, breathing heavy, dripping with blood. But instead of guilt, he felt power. He thought, this is it. This is who I am. What he didn't know was that the story wasn't over, because outside that door, someone else was about to arrive. While Ahmed was standing in that blood-soaked apartment, there was a knock at the door. It was the children's grandfather, an old man arriving like he always did to pick up the kids and take them to their grandmothers. Ahmed froze. He didn't open the door. The grandfather knocked again, called their names, waited. Finally, when no one answered, he sighed and left, assuming they were running late. That was Ahmed's chance to escape. But instead of leaving, he hesitated. He cleaned what he could, rearranged things, convinced himself he'd erased the evidence. Then, with blood still on his clothes and the knife in his hand, he stepped out of the apartment and walked straight into the grandfather. Face to face, the old man saw everything. The knife, the blood, the horror written across Ahmed's body. He lunged at him, but Ahmed slashed wildly, cutting him across the arms and the chest. The grandfather staggered back, bleeding, but somehow still standing. He pushed past Ahmed, ran inside, and found a nightmare. His daughter lying in a pool of her own blood, barely breathing. His grandchildren lifeless by the kitchen. He collapsed to the floor, screaming. His cries echoed through the building, dragging neighbors from their homes. People crowded the streets. Someone finally called the police. By the time officers arrived, the mother was still alive, clinging to life, but still alive. They rushed her to the hospital, fighting to save her, and miraculously she survived. Scarred forever, but alive. Her children, though, were gone, unfortunately. When she woke up, the police asked who had done this. Her answer was immediate. Ahmed, my next-door neighbor, the boy from across the street. She described him in exact detail. Within hours, there was a manhunt. Ahmed's parents were in shock. They told police their son had been missing for days. They had no idea where he'd gone. But when investigators searched his room, they found everything. The maps, the plans, the weapons. His obsession laid out like an open diary. Later that day, they found him near the coast, calm, detached, like nothing had happened. When questioned, he confessed, "I wanted to know what it felt like," he said. "I thought I was destined to be a killer. I thought I could be famous for it." He didn't feel remorse. If anything, his ego was bruised because he couldn't fulfill his quote-unquote destiny. but reality caught up fast. Ahmed's case reminds us that mental health isn't only about external trigger. Sometimes it's about internal predispositions. He fed an obsession until it became his destiny, his identity. The trial didn't take long. Psychiatrists examined Ahmed and they found nothing to be wrong with him, just cold, calculated choices he has made. He was declared sane and the court handed him a life sentence. At 19 years old, he is to spend the rest of his life behind bars. His parents sat in court, weeping. His mother kept asking, "What did we do wrong? We gave him everything." But sometimes it's not about what a parent did or didn't do. Sometimes it's about the darkness a person chooses to feed. Ahmed had fed his with hours and hours of crime shows, fantasies of power, and a hunger to be remembered, not in a good way. And in the end, he was remembered, but not as a criminal mastermind, not as the fifth most famous serial killer in the world, just as a boy who thought he could outsmart justice. This is where Ahmed's case flips the question. Manal's crime was nurture, but Ahmed's points to nature. Nothing went wrong, no poverty, no abuse, no trauma, and yet he chose darkness. This forces us to ask, are some people wired for destruction? Ahmed's parents thought they were protecting him. But what they didn't realize is that isolation can be just as dangerous as bad company. An empty room, when filled with only violent fantasies, is a prison cell built long before bars ever close. This is not blaming the parents, by the way. Every person who commits a crime has only themselves to blame. This is merely to point out that vigilance is more important than we think. And here we have the paradox. 2 killers, 2 crimes, both planned, but one was driven by emotional chaos, nurture. The other by internal wiring, nature. Both remind us that in many societies, we avoid the conversation. We say weak faith, we say evil souls, we never say mental health. But the truth is, mental health is at the center of both. 2 crimes, both premeditated, both merciless, but one was born out of emotion, the other out of obsession. Manal shows us what happens when shame, betrayal, and rage boil over. Ahmed shows us that sometimes darkness doesn't need a trigger. It just exists. And this is the part we avoid in society. We reduce crime to weak faith or bad morals, but that ignores the mental health crisis underneath. Manal wasn't given the tools to process rejection. Ahmed wasn't given the tools to process obsession. Both were left unchecked until violence became their only language. This is why I'm passionate about normalizing the discussion of mental health. This is not meant to sympathize with the perpetrators, but rather to examine what went wrong and what could have been avoided. Idris is gone. His children are orphans. Manal awaits her sentence. Ahmed rots in a cell. 2 tragedies in 2 different countries, tied together by betrayal and the illusion of control. And us, we're left with the reminder that behind every crime headline, there are families destroyed, lives shattered, and futures erased. Manal's crime was emotional. It came from loneliness, shame, rejection, humiliation. In some societies, women are often told to be patient, to endure, to swallow their pain quietly. There is no space to say, "I'm not okay." No space to admit that I feel abandoned. Instead, the silence builds until it explodes. And when it explodes, it doesn't just destroy the person. It destroys everyone within close proximity to them. Ahmed's crime was different. His life wasn't marked by deprivation. He had loving parents, stability, comfort, and yet he still chose darkness. This is where we confront the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes Evil isn't born in circumstance. Sometimes it's about who you truly are as a person, an internal wiring, a predisposition that makes someone gravitate towards violence and control. And in our society, how do we respond to that? Well, we don't. We call it evil. We call it weakness of faith. But we never ask, what if this boy had received psychological intervention before he hurt anyone? What if silence hadn't been mistaken for safety? I'm not saying that this could change what happened. I'm just saying that we need to pay more attention to mental health. So maybe the question isn't just, are killers born or made? Maybe it's what could have stopped them. If Manal had a space to process shame before it boiled into violence. If Ahmed's isolation had been noticed before it grew into obsession. If therapy wasn't a taboo. If asking for help wasn't considered weakness. Maybe, just maybe, we'd be telling different stories. Thank you for listening to another episode of Peace by Pearl, where the brain is not a maze to escape, but a map to navigate. I'll see you next week. Thank you.